turkey call for a friend of mine, and I was still using just different pieces and gluing it together. And I tried using some scraps they gave me. Well, I didn't really like the way it turned out, and I decided, well, I'm going to try to make one out of a solid chunk of wood. So I started out with a couple pieces of walnut, and I think it turned out pretty good. So I was going to go ahead and videotape the next one I was making, which I made out of a piece of cedar. And I'll show you how I did it. I want to go over a few of the tools I was using. Of course, I've got a table saw I can use, but you know, a good set of drill bits. I've got some spade bits, some sharp pencils, coping saw, which I just used a little bit. Here's the springs I use for the paddle, and some rubber bands, chalk. I use this rasp quite a bit, and it's got a flat side that's kind of fine, and then a flat side that's coarse, and it's also got a curved side that's coarse, and a curved side that's got a little finer cut to it. I've got this little bit I use here to taper the paddle, where you put the screw through, the Phillips screwdriver, got a ruler, set of wood chisels, small hammer, and I've got about 3 clamps and a drill. Now what I did to get this solid piece of wood is I took some smaller pieces that I had on hand, which was pretty rough sawn, and I cut a flat edge on them on one side like this, and then I just took 2 of them and glued it together and cut it to the size I needed. I usually like to start with about 2 inches wide. On the one I'm making today, I used a piece of cedar, and I cut it to about 1 7/8 inch square, and I start out by deciding how big I want my box opening to be, and then I mark my points. I like to leave about 3/4 of an inch on the end where I'm going to put my screw in for the paddle, and on the other end I usually like to leave about a 1/2 inch, and then later I'll just decide, you know, what I want my handle to look like. But I start out by using a spade bit, and of course I mark my depth, because I don't want to go all the way through the bottom of this box, and I mark it to about here, leaving about 1/4 of an inch to chisel out, and I'll start by drilling just a series of holes across this whole chunk of wood. I don't know if you can see it, but I drew a center line down here to keep my holes consistent and down the middle of the board, and I also drew a stopping point so I know where to finish my row. Now we're to the point where we're going to use a chisel. Always remember to keep your chisels sharp, and if you have a kit that's a few different sizes, I only have flat ones, but I wish I would have a curved one for some of these edges up here in the front. But always remember to start a little bit of distance away from where you want to end up, because you can always take more off, but you can't add it, and if you want to try to make it look good, just think about that ahead of time. You want to be sure to have your blocks secure. You know, if you have a few clamps like this, you can clamp them down, or if you have some of those older ones, anything. I don't care if you run a screw through it, just keep the thing from moving so you don't mess up what you're trying to do. As you can see, I've pretty well got this all flattened out around the edge. Now what I'm going to do next is take a small chisel and just try to flatten this bottom out all the way down until these little holes from the spade bit are gone. I haven't really used chisels that much, but something I'm learning as I'm going along. If I take a chisel and hold it flat against the side of the box, and then I use the hammer to hit down into it where I'm trying to chisel it away, it kind of gives me a guideline to how much I'm going to take out and where the piece of wood's going to come out at. I've got the bottom pretty well cut out to the depth I need, so what I'm going to do next is take my large chisel, and I've used a smaller one before, and just use it to barely shave off a little bit of this side. I really like the taper on the edges for the sound and just the look of the box, so just be careful when you're doing it and just take little by little. Remember not to cut away at the bottom on the side. You know, I'm just taking away at the top and tapering it down. I got to the point where I did all I could with the chisel, so I went ahead and grabbed a rasp and I went along inside of the box to try to flatten it out a little bit. What I'm going to do next is decide what I want the box to look like on the outside. Like I said, I like to have tapered edges on the outside, so I'm going to set up the table saw, make a few cuts down the side, making sure I don't cut out the inside of this box. I don't want to overdo it. Alright, so I've got my bevel set up on my table saw at about 3 degrees if I get in line with it here so you can see. And I want to try to show you, as you look down this line, the blade, you can see it down this edge, it doesn't line up, or it doesn't go over this, so I know I'm not going to overdo it, and I'm still going to have a lip on this when I get done. But the important thing to know is the way this saw is set up with a bevel, the blade tilts in, so I flip it upside down and I go ahead and rip it down and make my 2 cuts to have my bevel down the edges. I've got my bevel cut on the one side, and I'm going to go ahead and make the second cut. I want to be sure to hold this tied up against the fence. I don't want it to flip, because I got that bevel, it can flip. I wanted to make a note, when I cut these bevels, I ran one through, and then I shut it off, turned it around, and ran the other one through, and I did not move the fence at all. When you have your width set, you're good to go. Just let it go and run it through the 2 times that you need for each side. I don't know if you can see this real well. It's kind of out of focus, but I drew a mark on there where I want my handle to be. Now, a couple ways you can do this is, if you have a bandsaw, you can make a few cuts going down this way and then just use a chisel to knock it off, or you can do like I might try to do and use a handsaw like this after I have it clamped down and just make my cuts down to where all I have is just some, pieces of wood standing up here, to where all I have to do is use a chisel to knock it off the same way as I would do with a bandsaw. Now I'll just take a chisel. I can use this to clean it up, and then I'll go back over it with a rasp to help smooth it over. I don't know if you can see the lines I made. I didn't really bother using the rasp on this too much because I'm going to do a lot more work to it. But I drew the outlines for where I want my handle to be, so I'm going to go ahead and do the same thing like I did with this part and cut some notches down through here and use a chisel. You can kind of see what I've done. I went ahead and did the cut straight down. I chiseled all that off, like I said, and then I took the rasp and smoothed all this over. I'm going to go ahead and flip it over and repeat the process on the other side of the handle. Now this whole process would go a lot faster if you had a bandsaw or even like a bench sander or something like that, but I just like using hand tools, so I'm going to go ahead and do it this way. Or I like using them until I get those tools. Now you can start to see the basic shape. I'm going to go ahead and use the rasp on this some more and try to smooth everything out. I'll also look at the underneath side of it and just see how even I can get these edges. I don't want it to look out of proportion on either direction, so just try to look down the center and pay attention to the curves as you're working on your box call. Next, I'm going to go ahead and start working on the arch part of the turkey call right here, and the way I do that is I always like to measure 1/4 of an inch down on each end, and I'll mark that off. Alright, now to measure my center, I just took this ruler and I'll go from one end to the other. It's about 7 1/8 inch, so that would be about 3 1/2 plus a 1/16. So I'll go ahead and make a mark on here where that is. I'll flip it over and do the same over here. About 3 1/2 and a 1/16. So here's my centers, and I'll just take my pencil and just kind of sketch an outline for where I want my arch to be. I also can tell where I want my curve to start by just looking where the opening starts. I'll make a line straight down, and that's where the curve will start. The same for up in the top end of the box. I'll make a mark straight down from this, and that's where I want my curve to start, going up here. Like I said, just pay attention to your lines Try not to go too deep and just start making your cut. Now that I've got that chiseled off, I'm going to go ahead and use a rasp on it. Now I'm going to start working on the arch a little better. I'm going to go ahead and take a little bit of this off. I hope you can see that okay. I wanted to show you the kind of curve I have on this. I try to keep it pretty tapered and smooth. Right now I can tell my sides are a little too thick, maybe even twice as thick as I need them. Well, I ran it through the table saw a few more times, and I got it as close to about 1/8 of an inch as I want to. I may take the rasp and try to flatten this out a little bit more on the inside. The next thing I'm going to do then is go ahead and try to round these corners out a little bit, like I did on my other one that I made out of that piece of walnut, as you can see here. I went ahead and took a piece of sandpaper and sanded over the whole thing. I did use the rasp a little bit on the edges where I had the table saw rip a little bit off the sides and smooth that over, and I'm getting to a little bit more of a finished product. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and figure up the width of the lid. Now to do that, I just take the box saw and I set it in here beside the fence. I want the same width, if not just a little bit wider than the body of this. I'll take it in there and set it in. I'll do this with the saw running. And then next I'll go ahead and rip the thickness of this to about 3/8 of an inch. Sometimes I do this as a quarter. Now I've got it to width and thickness and length. I'm going to go ahead and match up the ends on this turkey cowl, and I want to kind of get the same pattern for my handle of the lid as I do here, so I'll just take my pencil and trace around the edge. As long as it's close, I'm happy. I can always take off a little more. I don't know if you can see my pencil marks very well, but I've got a little bit of a curve right here with a straight line, a little bit of curve back here with a straight line. And a handy tool to use when just doing this, if you don't have a bandsaw, is a coping saw. I just clamp it up here and I'll cut these edges off. I just finished doing my cut, so I'll take my rasp, go over this a little bit. Okay, now that I've went ahead and drilled the hole in the paddle, I'll go ahead and use this other bit just to taper it a little bit. And that gives it a nice form for the screw to fit through and gives it a little space to wobble. Next I'll start forming the lid. The key thing I try to do when I'm making the paddle, the curve on it, is I want to keep the same thickness in the center, but I'll always taper it down to maybe to where I have a flat edge here of maybe 1/8 of an inch or so. I start out with a pretty steep cut just so I can see where I want my thickness, like I said, about 1/8 of an inch, and then I'll just taper that out from there. I wanted to show you I did go ahead and take that taper all the way down to the end. All it's supposed to do is put this part together. I'll get it chalked up and get a rubber band on it and see if I can make it do anything. I'll usually just take, I don't have any carpentry chalk or anything, I just have this regular stuff for like blackboards, and rub it all over the different parts. Just pop a rubber band on here.